So we are here with the Heli-Saw, but first we've got Graphene OS.
Yes, Graphene OS. So Android has been around for a while. It's a Linux distribution, essentially, but there's not really a whole, like usually when there's a Linux distribution, there's a whole bunch of distros that go along with it. Like, for example, there's Debian, right? That's a mainline Linux distribution. And then to go along with Debian, there's like all the flavors of Ubuntu, various Debian, other Debian derivatives, Kali, etc.
Hannah Montana OS, you know.
Hannah Montana OS, thank you. That one's the most important. And we're finally seeing some Android distros that look really promising and interesting. One of which is Graphene OS. So Graphene OS is not just like a reskin of Android. From what I can tell, they're actually doing a lot here. So if you go to the source, there's a whole bunch of forks within the Android open source projects. So not only are they reskinning it or changing some of the settings like you see in certain Linux distributions, but they're forking and rewriting a bunch of components within the Android system. So this includes things like kernel configs, platform art, etc., but also things like the standard libc library, device Google GS101, device Google, GS101 SC policy. And the idea, and they added a whole bunch of new repositories added to Graphene OS, including a hardened malloc repository library, kernel Google Ravioli. I don't know what that is. But yeah, they're basically sort of creating a distro of Android. And the idea is to make a more secure version of Android, which will be interesting to see. They're taking out all the Google specific components. So it reminds me a bit of Edge in that compartment. Like they have a new web browser called, starts with a V. I forget the name of it. But they have a new web browser for their operating system. Oh, here it is. Vanadium. So this Vanadium browser, is sort of like Edge in that it's Chromium without all the Google stuff in it. And they're taking out all the Google specific stuff from the Android operating system, hardening it up as much as they can. But of course, it's going to be running Android applications. So
how do you get those Android applications since they don't allow you to have Google Play?
I don't know. That's a good question.
And why would anybody want a phone without Google services? They think Google is a security risk?
Well, I mean, it's a privacy risk.
Well, all right, it is, yes. But who in the world wants a phone when you can't put any apps on it?
I'm sure you can put apps on it. I mean, you could always install apps manually. Now, I don't know what the default package manager is for.
Well, they say there's something that is possible to install page services as a set of fully sandbox apps.
Right.
Whatever that means. All right. So, well, it'll be interesting to see.
I wonder how you fully sandbox apps on Android OS.
Yeah.
Well, they're already somewhat sandboxed, but they're going to sandbox them more.
Well, I guess the main security risk on Android phones is all the malware in the App Store.
Right.
So I could see how you could say getting rid of the App Store will prevent those problems, but it will also prevent all valuable utility of the phone.
Maybe. I mean, I'm assuming you can install APK, packages.
So then you can get malware on it.
I'm sure you can get malware. I mean, that's definitely.
Well, then I'll be happy. But anyway,
yes. Now the other thing too is that it only runs on a few devices currently, and they're all Pixel devices. So the Pixel 3, 4, 5, and 6.
Oh well.
So
all right.
So the thing that eliminates all Google stuff only runs on Google devices.
Yeah, only runs on Google phones. That's incredible.
Yes.
Yeah, I see a few little logical problems here. All right. Well, Liz has got cyber attacks starting World War III.
Yeah, this was an interesting article in Reuters yesterday that about saying that a cyber attack on a NATO member could actually trigger the collective defense clause. And
Except
it's
it
some-
happens 10 times a day. So what are they talking
it
about?
does. And it's interesting because not only does it happen 10 times a day, this is something we've talked about forever. And we've never really come to any kind of hard conclusions on it, but the theoretical posed in this article is pretty interesting, I thought, which the example that they used was if say, for example, a Russian cyber attack on Ukraine impacted Poland, who is a NATO member, and then that cyber attack triggered power outages that result in hospital patients dying or knocking out traffic lights, causing fatal road accidents involving U.S. troops who were deployed in Poland.
Now, this already happened, right? With the NSA-based Russian ransomware attack that shut down the hospitals in Britain.
I'm not sure how many people died from that, and I'm not sure if any. I think maybe the key here in this scenario is U.S. troops that are stationed over there. So I don't know that it necessarily took out any service members.
No, it was not very redirected. It was just spread around like a virus, wiping out random stuff everywhere.
Which usually, that's how this stuff usually goes. I mean, sometimes it's highly targeted, but you know. So I thought this was just a pretty interesting story and a pretty interesting thing to consider. Especially, usually these discussions don't make it into mainstream news outlets.
Yeah, well, increasingly, the military has been trying to develop military doctrine about cyber attacks. And you have to define what they are and when they're serious enough and stuff. And we're still in the infancy of that.
Well, and that was one thing too that was addressed in the article, is essentially now it's coming down to the point that the allies are going to have to make a hard call on this and decide, what's enough to trigger this.
Yeah. All right. And Alan's got Google Maps.
Yeah, this is a follow-up to the story I had last time. Google Maps was a very useful resource, open source intelligence resource for tracking movements of Russian troops into Ukraine at the start of the invasion. Now it appears that Google has turned off all of the traffic indications, or the traffic layer on Google Maps within Ukraine. It's still on in surrounding countries, but not in Ukraine itself. And I can attest that up until a few days ago, it was possible to actually look at traffic jams outside of major cities that were indicative of some kind of military movement, particularly outside of Kiev to the northeast. So Google has done this at the request of the Ukraine government, evidently. And so now you cannot find any information about traffic movement through Google, at least.
I don't know why the Ukrainians would want to turn it off. It would mostly tell you about the Russians, I would think.
The concern was that it would indicate movements of refugees, among other things.
Well, I suppose it would.
Yes, but there's also been quite a lot of evidence of Russian soldiers carrying Android phones. So it does go both ways. However, NATO has been flying a number of surveillance flights outside of Ukraine's borders, and are using satellite surveillance. And there's plenty of open source intelligence through Ukrainian civilians posting videos to TikTok and the like. So presumably there's still a steady flow of information that Ukrainian military planners have available to them, whereas the Russians seem to be much more constrained on the intelligence front.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing I read was that the Russians don't have good radio capabilities. I don't know if anybody chose that one, but they're actually using unencrypted radio traffic for military activities. So you can just tune in with your web SDR and hear everything they're doing. The Russians seem to have very poorly planned this.
Very poorly indeed. Yeah, they're using civilian radios and are running out of food, or have food rations that have expired long ago and are probably not safe to eat.
And I've seen a lot of reports that they show up and people say, leave, and they say, yeah, we don't want to be here. Nobody told us we were going to be killing people. We thought this was just an exercise, and they just leave. And I see,
there have been more and more instances of abandoned, perfectly functional vehicles, Russian military vehicles with gas in them, perfectly functional, and they're just abandoned, sometimes in groups on the side of the road.
Yeah, and I saw another one that just get like 10 people to just jump on the hood and pound on it and say leave, and so they just leave.
The one of my favorite stories was the two guys who ran out of gas in their tank and went to the police station looking for more.
It really seems like the Russian military has not figured out that they're supposed to like be killing the Ukrainians. Very far from it.
From what I've read, the command is very poor. They're extremely disorganized. They don't know what they're supposed to be doing. Don't have the supplies they need.
You know, it reminds me of Donald Trump's Muslim ban. And I think in both cases, it reflects your leader just makes a decision and demands that you do it, and nobody is really on board with it. Nobody else really wants to do it. Anyway, now I get to the most glorious story ever, the Heli-Saw, which is like something you'd think Calvin would invent, and Calvin and Hobbes. Now PG&E totally does not trim the trees very well. So we keep getting fires and all sorts of problems, and trees knock down the power lines, which I can see them all over San Francisco, branches growing right through the power lines. And apparently it's really a lot of drag, a lot of bother to go there with like a pickup truck and a chainsaw and cut down the trees. So they made this thing, has 8 spinning blades hanging from a helicopter, which you then drive right next to the high voltage power lines, sawing through the trees, which seems insane to me. The first thing I thought is the wind will blow and that thing will hit the wires and it'll blow up the helicopter and kill people. But to make it even worse, they then went to a park where people were walking there in the park, one of the parks we go to, and started cutting down the trees with the HeliSaw while people are walking through the park, dumping branches on them and stuff. And they're like, hey, man. So they're apologizing for going to the park, you know, and they say, well, nobody got hurt. But this whole thing seems remarkably amazing and insane. And they said, this is much better. You can clear like in a day what would take a month to clear with like a couple of guys in chainsaws. And I suppose you could. Anyway, that's the march of technology. Now, see what they got to do is make it autonomous and run by a drone.
No,
so AI is zipping around, sawing through things.
And make it nuclear powered.
Yeah. Then it could just be up there permanently, deciding when this object is bad. This object must be sawed.
And replace it. No, sorry, don't replace. In addition to the saws, lasers.
Well, yeah, I mean, everything should have a death ray. I mean, that's
and make sure there's a web interface to use to control it.
Yeah, running like unencrypted telnet. That would be
yeah. Port 80. There you go.
There you go. So let's go back to Kaitlyn, who has got people blocking chips to Russia.
Right. So I heard about tech embargoes against, or tech sanctions against Russia. But this is like all the major chip manufacturers. So this is TSMC, Intel, and AMD. They're all halting shipments to Russia. So like you cannot get a mainstream processor in Russia anymore. And so this is an article on appleinsider.com written by William Gallagher. And I mean, that's basically it. They already shut off services like Apple Pay, so you can't pay. And now all the chip manufacturers, if you run Apple Silicon, you can't get an Apple Silicon chip. If you run an Intel machine or AMD machine, you can't get those chips. Everything has been, all mainline processors have been removed. And so I'm going to share my screen here because this reminds me of the 1980s and Soviet era computers, because this is what they're going to have to do since they cannot get new chips into their system. They're going to have to start designing their own. And there are some amazing Soviet era computers that were designed. And because in the 80s, they couldn't get the mainstream parts either. So you have like this wonderful beast, the Agat 8-bit personal computer. You have, a few things that sort of remind you of like the Commodore 64, but just not as fancy. And it's just stuff like this, just really weird systems running on weird clone chips. The BK, which stood for home computer. This one is wonderful. I like this one a lot.
Wow.
The Robotron, yeah.
Can't they buy pre-built consumer machines though? Like, can't they still buy an HP that has these processors in them?
I think that would defeat the purpose of the ban.
Hmm.
Those chips are not getting into Russia. Now you can, if you go onto eBay. So I'll do that right now. If you go onto eBay.
Well, more what I was thinking is that, for example, Apple has been pressured to stop retail sales in Russia, but they haven't agreed to do that yet. So,
Yeah.
I mean, theoretically, you can still go buy yourself a MacBook that contains.
Yeah, for it's going to take a while for the shipment to end, but you can go onto eBay, get yourself some 6502 CPUs, build yourself an old 80s Russian computer. I mean, you know, there's
502, I mean, that's what I started with.
it's only $12.
No
You can
more-
get you can get a lot of ROM ICs for the Z80 for $25. I mean, you know, there's ways to build computers even in Russia, but you're not getting the newest mainline processors anymore. So
Yeah, you could get it. You could build an Abacus too.
you could build an Abacus, yeah. So I'm looking forward to the new computer designs they come up with.
Boy, I don't know. All right, and Elizabeth has the biggest plane.
Yeah, so I thought this was a kind of an interesting story. The world's largest aircraft, which was the Antonov 225 cargo plane, got destroyed this week when a airfield got bombed. So that's kind of a bummer because this thing is just massive. If you've ever seen videos of it, it's just a behemoth. So it got bombed, and they're saying it'll cost $3 billion in 5 years to fix it. So that's pretty crazy. They're trying to stick Russia with the repair bill, but we'll see how that works out.
And was it actually still being used? Is it valuable for some reason?
I believe that it has been in use. So I don't know. I don't know how frequently or what the use cases were for it, but I know they maintain it and still it was in use for something. So
Yeah.
we'll see.
So if it's in a hangar, it's in use. Hangars are expensive.
Yeah.
You don't put planes in hangars if they're in use. If they're not in use, they're in scrap yards.
All right. And Alan has got Premise.
Yes, Premise, the app that allows people to do small tasks for payment.
Oh, like Mechanical Turk.
Well, like Mechanical Turk, that's right. Except Premise differs from Mechanical Turk in that the tasks being done are usually at the behest of intelligence agencies and include tasks such as go outside and take pictures of all the buildings at such and such intersection, or go and count all of the shells that landed in such and such area.
Oh,
Premise, I talked about this company several months ago. It got into the news because the CIA was using it to collect intelligence in certain locales where US intelligence didn't reach very easily. And it was paying people to do tasks, surveillance and intelligence related tasks.
so you can be an
even though
amateur
it was never
spy.
described as such.
Yeah.
Now, apparently, Premise has been hiring people to do tasks, or has been paying people to do tasks in Ukraine too. And people were going out and doing this kind of intelligence work in the midst of this war. And the Ukraine government caught wind of it and asked them to stop it, to knock it off, because of concerns that these people were acting on behalf of Russian military requests, doing things like putting out markers for bombs and the like. That may not be true, given Premise's very close relationship with US intelligence. I think something like 80% of Premise's work is related to US intelligence, at least by one estimate. Nevertheless, the Ukraine government didn't appreciate it. So they have said that they're no longer doing anything in Ukraine.
So this is cancel culture and censorship and stuff.
Apparently so, yes. They're also against crowdsourcing work.
That's right. It's crushing the economy, denying people valuable opportunities to earn 30 cents by taking pictures of bomb damage.
Exactly.
Well, okay. And then, so the cryptocurrency exchanges were also asked, like the banks and everybody else, to block the Russian accounts, and they all said, hell no, money wants to be free. We will never censor and limit everything. All the major crypto exchanges have refused to freeze Russian accounts when asked by Ukraine. So they're living up to their, libertarian principles, Binance and all the others. So
But now the US government's leaning on them pretty hard, reportedly.
oh, well, that's interesting. It reminds me of when NFTs came out, and then somebody stole the NFTs, and then they pressured the exchange to steal them back. And everybody said, hey, I thought these cryptocurrency things were like unstoppable, decentralized, and all trades were final. And yet, wait, you can like just yank it back? What the hell? So they're not really that decentralized.
Well, I think at some point these exchanges are going to prioritize their ability to do business in the US above their libertarian ideals.
Yeah, well, I guess we're going to see how that goes.
Yeah.
And the difference between the cryptocurrency economy and the normal bank economy is not as big as they've been hyping it up to be.
Not at all.
Yeah, all right. And then Kaitlyn has got Lockheed.
Oh, not more than Lockheed. So spacenews.com has an article written by Sandra Irvin talking about Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and York Space. So 3 really big space Department of Defense contractors. They're putting up a new satellite constellation, low Earth orbit, that is going to be just a regular computer network, but it's going to be very much like ARPANET. Now they're saying it's like the new internet or a new internet. It's very much going to be like ARPANET. So this is going to be a military government only low Earth satellite network for military uses. So things like moving, giving orders to soldiers in different areas, relaying information between point A and point B. And the idea behind it is that you don't have a central point of failure, just like the internet. So if one node goes down, they just switch to different nodes, they reroute.
They don't already have that?
They do not. Not in
It
low
seems
Earth
like they
orbit.
should have had that 20 years ago, a military satellite network. What the hell? They're pretending that stuff over civilian networks like the Russians?
Pretty much. I mean, a lot of the stuff is, they'll relay over geostationary satellites. I mean, there are ways to do it, but or they'll just use the internet, period. I mean, the internet was designed to withstand a nuclear attack.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not, the internet is military grade. I mean, that's, even though we cannot use it. But yeah, they're putting up a new network of low Earth orbit satellites, which is very interesting. So we're going to see a bunch of satellites go up. Each company is going to deliver 42 satellites by 2024. So that's going to be about 120 remaining actual working satellites by the end of 2024. And they're going to create a constellation, and they'll probably grow from there. And of course, after 10 or 20 years or 30 years, this will, of course, open up to the general public as they upgrade and get their even better networks going. So this will be very interesting to see how this plays out. And I do like the idea of having satellites be decentralized, because it's not that hard to take out a satellite if you are a very wealthy nation at war. You can send lasers. Like, this is the one time I've heard of lasers actually being used in warfare. You can pew a laser, a satellite, and it can go down. And you can send a missile at a satellite, and then nothing you can really do. The satellite can't really maneuver that well. It's but so having a decentralized network is really a good way to go for cybersecurity in space. So
Yeah, sounds like a great idea. I thought they would have done it a while ago.
apparently not.
Yeah, all right. And Liz has the NVIDIA attack, which I've seen a lot of random nonsense about on Twitter.
Yeah, that's kind of been an entertaining story this week. I mean, though, obviously there's more important things going on in the world, but this was entertaining just because, well, I mean, NVIDIA did their standard like downplaying, oh, it wasn't that serious. Well, other reports were like, everything's compromised, it was major. So we don't know which, but then the best part was that the allegedly the threat actors went on Twitter and were irate because according to them, NVIDIA had hacked back and ransomwared all of their stuff. And of course, these reports are unconfirmed, but
Sounds
it
like
is pretty
really
entertaining.
bogus.
Huh?
There's no evidence of that, right? That sounds
There
ridiculous.
is no evidence of that. That's why I say these are unconfirmed.
Yeah.
But it is it is pretty damning when the hackers are enraged enough to post all these accusations on Twitter. You're like, you guys are criminals. How dare you? How dare you lock up our stuff? We had backups, but boy, what a pain in the butt that was for us.
Yeah, yeah. And accusing NVIDIA of ransomware you, it's pretty lame.
Yeah, but it was still, but it was also pretty funny.
Oh, yeah, yeah. All right. And Alan has got an explanation of these Waymo things that I see everywhere bothering me. Every time I drive a car, there's like half a dozen of these Waymo things going around.
And they're all getting stuck in the same dead ends.
Oh, well, I didn't see that.
Oh, it happens from time to time. Yeah, very obscure little alleyways and residential streets that are clogged with several Waymo vehicles.
Well, I was driving last night or night before, and Apple Maps instructed me to do something illegal. I ended up hosed and miles off course. So I can see how that would happen.
Yes, well, Waymo being a Google outfit, or excuse me, Alphabet outfit, I'm sure makes them a lot better.
Probably the data is better anyway. Yeah.
As far as the maps are concerned, actually, yes, I do think that Google's done a much better job than Apple. But in this case, Waymo's making progress towards becoming an autonomous ride, excuse me, not a ride share, not ride sharing, robo-taxi company. Real progress, because the California Public Utilities Commission has granted them a permit to charge riders for trips for autonomous vehicles in San Francisco. And this is a first. So you have Waymo vehicles, autonomous Waymo vehicles driving around the streets of San Francisco, now able to charge passengers for the privilege of riding in one. Now, they've, of course, been operating in San Francisco for quite a while and have also, in the past several months, been taking non-paying passengers around. But now they are allowed to charge people for the privilege of riding.
So what I've been seeing is like the beta testing.
Yes, that's right. That was a select group of testers who were getting free rides around the city and supposedly returning detailed feedback to Waymo.
Well, from all that I'm hearing about Tesla problems, I'm not sure I want to be a guy to jump in one of them.
Yeah, well, if you're in the car, I think you're probably much better off than if you're a pedestrian outside the car. So,
oh, that's reassuring.
Or a cyclist.
Or a cyclist, yes, especially cyclists.
I wonder if the fares are lower than, a typical Uber ride or whatever.
They are 2.5 times higher than Uber.
What? So who the hell would do that?
Well, you get to ride in an autonomous vehicle. It's got a certain tech cachet, I guess.
They're going to have to cut that price pretty soon.
Yeah. Well, they also still have drivers. Even with this permit, they are required to have drivers who are not very hands-on, I'm assuming. So the technology has a ways to go yet.
Yeah. Okay. But anyway, that's a step forward, I guess. All right. And so then I've got the Nazis. So Marjorie Taylor Greene headlined the Nazi conference that's right next to the Republican conference, the Conservative Political Action Caucus. They a guy who is just an open Nazi made a Nazi conference next to it. The euphemism is white supremacist or something like that. But the point is, they have chants about the Jews are bad and how they all love Putin and Putin is like Hitler and that's a good thing. And she was the headliner. And apparently, it never occurred to her that this would lead to any backlash. So the next day they said, "Hey, you're not supposed to be like openly a Nazi in the Republican Party." And she said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize he was a Nazi. I had no idea." And so I think this is why I think she's really a front runner. I always thought she'd be the most logical choice for Trump's vice president. And Trump did announce at CPAC that he's running for president. Because she understands what Trump understands, which the rest of the Republican Party is slow to figure out, which is that the Nazis are their base. And what you have to do is cheer for them and then back off just a little to make it appear like you're not serious about it. And they will understand that. That's the dog whistle, that we're really on your side, like Charlottesville, the fine people on both sides. And then you say something, you back off just an inch when the spotlights point to you. So you keep those people in your support. And it's extremely effective. And they had the straw poll, and Trump is by far the number one winner. Number two is DeSantis, but he's down at like 10%. So DeSantis probably won't even bother to try to oppose Trump. And it looks, that's why I think we're watching Putin. I think we're going to have our own Putin back soon, running this country and doing more, completely uncontrolled right-wing stuff. Will basically be overtaken by Nazis. And they're very, very increasingly open about just being Nazis. And this is how you do it. You gradually, like heating the water with a frog, you gradually get people used to a little bit more open Nazi stuff and a little bit more and a little bit more until they just accept it. So, and Mitch McConnell spoke up and said, "We can't have white supremacists in the Republican Party. They're totally not welcome here." But you know who's not welcome here is Mitch McConnell. The Nazis are completely taking over the Republican Party, and they're pushing out all the moderates very fast. Kinzinger, Cheney, McConnell are being told, you're the dinosaurs. The future is the Nazis. Although they don't quite admit openly to being Nazis, except about half the time. So anyway, that I saw that stuff, and then I thought I found a couple of particles which have the opposing narrative, which is that a lot of Trump's most egregious things turned out to be kind of true. Like, for example, the vaccine for the kids is all bullshit. The Pfizer vaccine for kids 5 to 11 had only a 12% effectiveness rate. So all those anti-vax people that said, "I'm not giving this junk to my kids," were probably right. That stuff is worthless. And Hunter Biden's laptop was real. And that everyone, including me, said, "Oh, this is obviously fake. Nobody would take your laptop full of incriminating stuff and just take it to the repair shop and leave it there, and it would end up in the hands of Rudy Giuliani." But that's true. And remember, Rudy Giuliani was so excited. He had this envelope full of papers, and he ran to Trump and said, "I found the most awesome thing ever. This is going to save the election." And everyone said, "He's a lunatic. It's all a conspiracy theory." But it wasn't really. He really had Hunter Biden's laptop, and it really was full of incriminating stuff. And Hunter Biden did a lot of rotten stuff in Ukraine. So, even though liberals like me scream contempt and abuse at the Republicans, some of their most egregious, outrageous things, in fact, were true. This reminds me, when I was a kid, the hippies said, "The CIA is putting LSD in the water, man. You got to get off the grid." And I said, "You people are just paranoid," but they were. They were putting LSD in the water. And they were putting radioactive iron in stuff that pregnant women were eating just to see what would happen. We really did some of that stuff. Anyway, so that's the problem with conspiracy theories. Some of them are true. Anyway, the last thing here, I think Liz had. Yeah,
I was going to say, you can always tell the difference between a true conspiracy theory and a false one by how poorly it was covered up. If it is well done and it has not been covered up very well, it's a real conspiracy theory.
I'm not sure how to apply that advice.
Basically, I found that our government is terrible at conspiracy theory or just running conspiracies. And if it comes out and there's all this evidence, and then okay, there was something there. If you have a conspiracy like the moon landing was fake, and 6 years later, there's still not much to support it, then it would require huge people in the know just not spilling.
I think a lot of the problem is that people people have a hard time accepting the notion that you can't prove a negative. And that's where a lot of this stuff comes into play. You know, when I've had discussions with people who still don't believe the moon landing happened, it always comes down to, well, you can't prove it did. You can't prove they didn't fake it. And, you know, it's tough to argue with that sort of logic.
Yeah.
I guess, you know, even if it's,
Well,
you know,
yeah.
you could turn it around and say you can't prove they did fake it, but for some reason that doesn't end the discussion debate.
Well, I like Kaitlyn's point, and the way I look at it is the strongest pillar of American democracy that still works very, very well is the free press. There are all these reporters out there digging up everything, so you can't keep secrets of any kind for long.
Right. And yeah, I was going to say that the one of the big things about conspiracy theories, like I'm really trying to understand the anti-vax movement. Like, what's going on?
It's been around forever too.
It's been around forever, and I'm really trying to understand, like, what's going on here. Are these people, you know, what are these people saying? What are they doing? And they're saying things like, well, you know, you're not, you know, you say, you know, you're on the side of the scientists, but you're not actually looking at the science, are you? You know, you're just, you take it on faith, you know, that the vaccines are good for you. You're not doing any research yourself. You're just, you're like sheep. And you know what? They're kind of right. You know, like,
and I must say, they have a point when they say that the American big pharma system is not really like benevolent and honest. They got a point there.
They do have a point.
That, and I mean, I do think too that, you know, the government lies to people all the time. And, you know, after a while, that makes folks doubt what they are told by the government for some strange reason.
Well, we have to really define the government, because I think politicians lie a lot. I don't think things like the Department of Agriculture lies to the public that much.
Well, for example, though, remember when the CDC said masking doesn't work because they didn't want people to run out and buy all the masks so that healthcare workers couldn't have access to it.
Well, I mean, and that was true. But they didn't say it didn't work. They just said that if they didn't recommend people get masks.
No, they said it didn't work. That's what the government said. And they were just absolutely lying.
Yeah.
This is one of those things where the right wingers that are mad at Fauci kind of have a point. They later admitted they calculated that lie. They knew they worked all along because healthcare workers have to do it when they perform surgery and everything. They're wearing masks. And well, of course, then they covered up the fact that COVID was airborne for about 6 months when they knew that. The problem is there is an issue of, do you want to make a public statement that will just create panic and make things worse?
Right. But anyway, so what I was trying to get at, though, is that there's a distrust.
Yeah.
And a lot of this stems from distrust and distrust of others. And a lot of people are predisposed to not trusting what other people say, especially when it comes from the government, which, as you say, does have a history of lying, has a history of institutionalized discrimination, racism, sexism, etc. And, you know, and it's, if we really want to get past conspiracy theories, a lot of people think, oh, we need to get the truth out there and educate people about, you know, what vaccines are and how they can help people. But really what we really need to be focusing on are people's base emotions, and in particular, trusting each other, you know, building relationships between the government and the people. And, you know, I don't know how to do that, but if you want to get people on board with, you know, the CDC, they really do need to build up public trust and focus on that moving forward.
Yeah,
I think that's the problem. We're not really on the same team anymore. We don't trust the government. We don't trust each other, and that's not healthy.
and I mean,
It's amazing is looking at Ukraine. They really all got on the same side and really worked together.
yeah, I was thinking about that too. You know, I mean, part of it too is that we have decades of lying to overcome, to rebuild that. I mean, you know, when one of the issues with the vaccine hesitance when it came out was in the Black community, because, you know, there isn't a great history there between the U.S. government and being honest and forthcoming about this stuff. So I mean, in a way, like it can be sort of understandable sometimes. And I think we do have to get to that point where we're being honest and frank with people. And I think it's gonna be a long time, and I think there are probably generations of people who will never trust the government just because of decades of lying.
Yeah. Well, there is one remaining story about a Chinese hacking tool. You got it, Liz.
Yeah, so this was kind of an interesting story. It's light on the details so far, so I'm interested to see where this goes. But it was another story through Reuters that was interesting just because of a couple points. So it's a story about how some researchers at Symantec discovered apparently a newly discovered hacking tool. It's been around for a decade, but apparently it is very sophisticated. So they've been calling it Doxin, DAXIN, and one of the officials from CISA mentioned that it was something they've never seen before. So apparently this is pretty unique, pretty sophisticated. Usually this stuff that's able to fly under the radar for that long and not be detected by anyone or anything is pretty impressive. So I'm going to be really interested to see what the mechanism by which this operates is. They did mention that the developers invested a significant amount of resources into making sure that they developed these communication techniques that blend in with normal network traffic. So I am really interested to see what's coming around the bend in terms of security research related to this, because I think we're gonna see some interesting stuff once we start getting some breakdowns of what it is and how it works.
You know, the fact that it's been hanging around for years undetected reminds me of another one of these paranoid conspiracy things. Like 15 or 20 years ago, I went to a presentation at UC Berkeley by people who were just developing the first version of Bro and their intrusion detection system, and using it, they found that their Unix servers had been compromised for a year and a half by people that had legitimate usernames and passwords. And that once they got root on the first Unix server, they found scientific professors' accounts and administrators' accounts that were also root on other systems and used it to propagate, and found that they had owned all the major Unix servers in the world for like more than a year, and nobody noticed because they were using legitimate names and passwords. And they never really were able to quite determine where they came from. They thought maybe they came from Brazil, but this is like paranoia stuff, like, everybody, the criminals have root on it, they can see everything, and that's kind of true.
Well, it was interesting to me that they mentioned in the article that the targets were very high level government targets in Africa and Asia. And I thought that was interesting because, they may or may not have targeted countries with less robust cyber defense capabilities, which would make it easier to go undetected, because the fact that they managed to keep this under wraps and keep it secret for a decade is pretty wild in and of itself. I mean, usually this stuff gets out a lot sooner and people are using it and folks know what's going on. Usually this stuff gets intercepted and figured out and weaponized.
Yeah, well, that seems on brand for China. When they hacked us, they really did a good job. Yeah. All right. Well, that's it for this one, and we'll be back on Friday.